On the Listening Post, we spend a lot of time analyzing news reporting, but we also like to explore other types of TV narratives because fiction, even soap operas, can provide a window on society. Colombians produce lots of soap operas, and their so-called telenovelas are seen across Latin America. But they're changing. Away from romantic fairy tales and family dramas, Colombia is now producing grittier fare, stories about narco trafficking, which have been a huge hit. Earlier this year, however, one series on a crime family upset a lot of people there. The show dramatized the story of the Castaño brothers, leaders of a right-wing paramilitary group. Critics say the program made heroes out of murderers and drug traffickers, and it ignored the voices of their victims. But the ratings are just too good for the genre to die out anytime soon. The Listening Post's Marcela Pizarro now on Colombia's narco novelas and the historical and political baggage that's weighing them down.
For years, the Colombian telenovela has been a staple for TV viewers around Latin America. Cinderella storylines, melodramatic close-ups, the long episodic build-ups to the happily ever after. But that narrative, rehashed and rerun, got old, and audiences got tired. Then came the narco novela, slick, glamorous thrillers on the Colombian drugs world.
Soy Pedro Pablo León Jaramillo.
A genre revamped, topping the ratings and exported around the Spanish-speaking continent.
No se innovaba hasta que llegó.
People got bored with the lack of innovation. And around 7 years ago, we started producing narco novelas, which took the reality of the streets into people's front rooms.
Como si los televisores fueran las ventanas de las casas.
TV really became a window to our world, and they've been very popular ever since.
En las preferencias de la gente.
Colombia has
always been the audiovisual mecca in this continent. Our dramas stand out from the other producers in Latin America. It's amazing how an anti-hero like a narco trafficker captivates audiences. He's at once complex, yet human, and that's why people fall in love with him.
Television has the power to build social imaginaries and construct the way people see the world. Problem is, narconovelas communicate that the definition of success is to get rich at all costs, and that anything goes, for narcos and for politicians. And that's had a very damaging impact on Colombian society.
Narconovelas have always had their critics. Excessive violence, they say. But this year, one narconovela sparked a new kind of controversy.
Tres Caínes.
Because the story went to the heart of Colombia's painful political history. Los Tres Caínes, the Three Cains, tells the story of the Castaño brothers, the real-life founders of one of Colombia's most notorious paramilitary groups. Set up to fight left-wing guerrillas, they killed thousands, were knee-deep in drugs trafficking, often with the blessing of the country's political elite. But the drama doesn't sit well with journalists who've tried to tell the real story.
The
problem is that the Castaño brothers are presented as heroes. Their evil sides are shown too, that's true. But those of us who have made films know perfectly well that the public end up feeling more sympathetic towards those who are on screen the most.
Estos guerrilleros son el cáncer de este país, señores. Y nosotros los Castaños nos vamos a encargar de exterminarlos.
When a story so complicated is told in such large brushstrokes, the story tends to get distorted and the murderers end up legitimized.
Cuando hay críticas, uno tiene que escuchar.
When there is criticism, we have to listen to it. And some people told me they felt underrepresented, and that I should have given the victim's point of view. But there's no way the channel would have bought that, because they want to use famous figures already etched on the Colombian psyche. If I'd have pitched a series about a peasant called Alfonso Gomez, who was murdered or displaced, it would have been rejected, because it doesn't have the same resonance as the Tres Caínes.
On the one hand, the series apologizes for the paramilitaries by giving them the status of sex symbols. On the other, the victims come across as wide-eyed innocents who didn't really understand what they were doing. All those clichés are offensive because the political opposition come across as totally idiotic.
José Antequera's father, a left-wing politician, was murdered in 1989 by paramilitary forces. When Los Tres Caínes hit TV screens, Antequera campaigned, along with others, to get sponsors to pull their advertising. The protest made some inroads. 5 major brands, including Nivea, withdrew their ads from primetime slots on RCN.
Riñe contra la libertad de expresión, contra la libertad de empresa.
These kinds of campaigns undermine freedom of expression. The ratings prove that a lot of people want to see these shows. So people who don't need to use the remote control and change the channel. They shouldn't stop other people watching what is a true story of our country.
In the context of such a violent history, the 2 main private channels have a massive social responsibility. They can't just say, if you don't like it, turn over. Recently, there's been an avalanche of shows where the lives of all the capos of this country have been serialized into a soap opera. Enough is enough.
No creo que quitarle la publicidad.
Withdrawing advertising is not censorship. The channel's main goal is to sell. So their defense is that they're just giving people what they want, like fast food sellers who say their food must be good because people buy it, despite plenty of proof that junk food has 0 nutritional value.
The job of fiction writers is to engage us, so they use storytelling devices. They take dramatic license, they exaggerate, if necessary, and edit things out to draw us in. It's the job of the news media to tell the true story. The problem is that news outlets in Colombia have often shied away from thoroughly covering all sides of what for Colombians has been the country's defining conflict. And some of the journalists who've tried have found themselves in trouble. Holman Morris is one of them. He's been covering Colombia for a decade, and he's one reporter who became a target through death threats and then a smear campaign by former President Álvaro Uribe, who falsely accused Morris of having ties with the FARC guerrilla. He's now the director of Canal Capital, a public broadcaster.
I think that private TV have a social responsibility. In a country like Colombia, which has the 2nd worst humanitarian record in the world, with 50,000 people disappeared, to a large extent due to the actions of the Castaño brothers, that social responsibility needs to take the form of another type of drama, one about our history, about our victims, which has never been taken into consideration in this country. Quite the opposite, they were ignored.
You have to distinguish how different genres have covered this armed conflict. One is the news media. There have been factual reports by independent journalists who have given the victims accounts. But the problem on these commercial channels is that they blur the facts to produce fiction.
These channels are taking advantage of a political story to produce narco dramas, and they're forgetting to respect the dignity of the victims. When it comes to historical memory in this country, we demand a socially responsible media, because what's at stake are the rights of the victims and the fight for transitional justice to pave the way to peace.
With a slew of narco novelas in production, that seems unlikely. So for the time being, this genre will carry on being the other Colombian export that's not necessarily all that good for you.
More Global Village Voices now on Colombia and the narco novelas that are watched all over Latin America.
Hay que tener en cuenta que el paramilitarismo en Colombia no es algo que se encuentre inactivo, el paramilitarismo continúa. La historia de los Tres Caínes no fue una historia de ficción, fue una realidad supremamente dolorosa para Colombia que no ha encontrado la justicia aún. Inevitablemente este tipo de series generan una empatía hacia los 3 personajes porque los muestra como personas que se vieron envueltas en una dinámica imposible de salir y cuya única opción era generar violencia como del tipo que generaron.
It is not normal that citizens have to tell televisions they are doing something wrong. Censorship is the worst thing I could think of, but if everything else fails, I think it's good that the responsibility comes from brands and from normal people. Our children cannot grow up seeing that being a criminal is good.